All right, let's get underway. So I don't have a new picture for you of Dora. This is actually quite an old one. This is at my home in Halifax, and Dora's in one of the cat trees. Yeah, I have a couple of cats as well, but let me see if I can show them. There they are. There's Sam. Sam is incredibly big and fat. And, he sleeps, and occasionally when he's not sleeping, he's eating. Doesn't do much else. Bruce, on the other hand, just seems to sleep. He doesn't even like to eat that much. But when I'm home, they keep me busy. They just, Sam in particular, likes some attention. So into April now, and our second to last class. So it's interesting. April 3rd, when looking up what day is this, it showed up as World Party Day and don't go to work unless it's fun day. Seem to be takes a day off work. Wish we could, hey? Anyway, let's celebrate. It's almost the end. You're almost finished. You've written your last test. Hopefully you wrote it on Friday. And that we're coming up to the last assignment, and there is no final exam. Someone emailed me today about that. Nope. That your last quiz is going to be on Saturday, but you can do it early. And the last discussion is due Wednesday of next week. But if you wanted to, you could be finished today if you just wrapped up your assignment, quiz, and discussion. The assignment, if you haven't looked at it, is relatively short. I'll do a tutorial. I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to do in it tomorrow. Well, on Tuesday, I shouldn't say tomorrow. This is actually Friday that I'm recording this. But it doesn't involve Excel at all. So I want to show you that bit. It's just a tree and a confusion matrix. So let's keep it short. You've got probably final exams to prepare for, and I'll get this course out of the way so you can get ready for them. If you haven't done already, please go to Gradebook, check your grades. There's a whole bunch of items appearing there now, over 30, and look to see what's missing. That if you're missing a quiz, not a big deal. I take only the best 10 out of the 13 quizzes. And the discussions, well, anyway, the discussions, if you've been doing them regularly, going to replace your lowest test score. There's nothing to replace your lowest assignment score. In case you don't see the last video, the last class, and particularly the students in person that actually last year, I had a great turnout to the last class just to say goodbye. Among the in-person students, should I say. That regardless, if this is the last time you're looking at my slides, if you did well in the course, consider becoming a teaching assistant, a marker, a tutor for the course. We're always looking for them. And if you've had a good year, consider applying for scholarships. You may have had an entrance scholarship when you came in, and hopefully your grades are good enough that you can renew it. But there's a large number of donor-sponsored scholarships. There's generally one application for almost all of them, and they look at things at grades, yes, but they also look at lots of other things, including financial need, which most of you have, but other activities that you do. The donor sets the criteria for the award. The survey is still open. I sent out a reminder again, this time on flexibility, and I've had many that they've missed things for different reasons, or they've needed accommodation because of different events that have happened. And we tried to be as flexible as possible. Is that really a good idea? Is that just making you lazy and careless and not paying attention to detail? That are we rewarding bad behavior? Some people think so. Anyway, I'd appreciate your feedback. That's one of the many questions on the survey. There are lots of things I'd like more information about. And even the course evaluation, I'm told, because we had problems last Monday, it's open, I think, until Monday. Anyway, So we're at the last stage, deployment. That we've worked through several of these things. Now, what exactly do we mean by deployment? It's a stage that in problem solving very frequently nobody pays attention to. They're so interested on the problem solving stuff that's more fun in the middle. So it's moving from analyzing a problem to and planning, that type of thing, to actually executing it, making things happen. That yesterday the Mass Casualty Commission submitted their 7,000 page report or something basically like that, 7 volumes anyway. It's huge. Key thing is recommendations. Headline in the paper had to do with the families. They want to make sure those recommendations get acted upon. Frequently, reports come out with recommendations, but then nothing happens. Same thing happens here. And you have to wonder why they don't happen. And is that in terms of the selling pitch given with the final report, or the way the recommendations are framed that have discouraged their implementation? So you've got to ask yourself different things. Your solution, your recommendations, do you really solve the initial business problem? It's amazing how many don't even speak to the business problem. They've gone off on a tangent. Very common. How will the results be used? Like, who's going to take them? Who's going to take ownership of them and implement them? That are people going to believe your recommendations? That do they have any trust in you? Do the metrics that you've used in evaluating it to say this is a really good solution, did you choose metrics that resonate with management? They may resonate with management, but they resonate with the public, with the users, the other end, because you often need buy-in from both groups. Are they really compelling? And have you focused on making them really compelling? Don't take this for granted. They don't speak for themselves. You have to tell them. Does management or the users actually understand the evaluation metrics? In a lot of cases, they don't. That you have an education role. Sometimes that's really complicated, and you end up losing the audience because they're not patient enough for the explanation to come out. You may need to choose metrics that are less than the best ones, but they're easier to understand. That if you've used a model, do folks really understand the model? Most of the time, they have no idea what the model is. That the trust is in you as the modeler, not in the specific model. It's just beyond their level of understanding. So it may not matter, but they've got to trust something to be able to trust the results. So have you done things to establish trust with them in your transparency, openness, those types of things? That in a lot of instances, people are willing to accept what we call a black box. Something goes in, something comes out. We don't understand how it got transformed in the middle of the black box, as long as it works properly. That I won't get into it, but I've got it, a real black box at home. It's a piece of kinetic art that is 50 years old, over that now, uses one little light bulb, produces incredible imagery, but we have no idea how it works inside. And it's very, very old technology. This is pre-computer days. So what are the risks and the pitfalls of implementation? Have you thought about those? Because there are problems that are going to happen. Are you ready for them? Have you anticipated some? Or have you got some you can't anticipate, but you can have a recovery plan? Who's going to go and fix things if things go wrong? Sometimes it's you don't know how to solve it, but you know who is going to have to take responsibility. So at the end of a project, you should have a set of deliverables. You should have defined those at the very beginning. What are you giving the client? So of course, there's going to be a summary report, probably really long. Does anyone read it? Not sure. Set of recommendations. Recommendations may include a model or some tangible, concrete thing that goes with the recommendations. that the recommendations should be clear and easy to read. Hopefully they read that section of the report. That there needs to be an implementation plan. And this is what's frequently missing. Is you've got recommendations, but who's going to implement those? That who should be assigned responsibility? Can you give them suggestions on how they should do the implementation and execute those recommendations? In a lot of cases, the recommendations are great, but management has no idea what to do with them. How do they implement them? They're good things to do, but who's going to do them, or how much is it going to cost? How are they going to get it done? It would be advisable to give them at least some direction on that. You may not have the knowledge to get down into the weeds because you don't know the organization, personnel and processes and hierarchies and all that sort of thing. And that's beyond the scope of what you were asked to do. But you've got to give them a little bit of direction on that type of thing. The model uses data, and it probably is one that you're going to keep using over and over again. And as you use it, you get more data. So how is that new data brought in? And when you bring the new data in, do you have to recalibrate the model? That, like when we estimated a value estimation model, we estimated all the parameters, the different coefficients in there. As we get new data, shouldn't we go back and adjust those sorts of things? As new stuff evolves, who's going to look after it? And then there's a lessons learned report. You probably learned a lot in doing the project. And if you were to do another project of a similar nature, same client, different client, whatever, what can you advise them? You may be even advising the firm that you're a consultant, you come in, you've done stuff, you're going to be leaving now. You're telling the firm, next time you hire a consultant, you should be doing this and this and this and this, because it took us longer and cost more money because of some of the things within the organization. You weren't ready to bring a consultant in. What lessons have you learned that are helpful for the client or helpful for yourself in doing future projects? So let me explain these a little bit more detail. I've already said what these things are, but an implementation plan is going to be who will do what. It's taking those recommendations and assigning them responsibility to different units, individuals possibly, that you're identifying certain systems that they've got that really maybe they should be changed. You've got to revisit certain procedures you've got to be able to make full use of this type of thing. So you've built a model for improving the way loans are approved or not. So how will loan officers use that information? Do they have to follow the model exactly or take it as input? So how do they work then in terms of how they handle each loan application? Are there certain ones that the model looks after and then other ones that no, those go to a loan officer? Maybe it's loans under $10,000 the computer deals with, and then if it's over 10, an individual uses it as input and that type of thing. So you're changing a lot of your whole approval systems there. Exactly how do they do it? And again, by whom? What are all the different players using this output? That there may be timing issues, that the implementation is in the first 6 months, we're going to do this. And then once that is working smoothly, this other recommendation is going to come in the next 6 months. And we've got phased implementation of different parts of the proposal you've given us, that we're not going to implement everything immediately. Maybe we want to make sure this piece works in practice first, that we don't get surprises before we add in other levels of complexity. That trying to implement everything at once may be overwhelming, and if something goes wrong, we have difficulty finding out what went wrong because we implemented so many things at once. You've got to have an evaluation plan, and this goes with a monitoring process. You're evaluating, you're monitoring what's taking place, and then you're periodically doing evaluation, see is it working or not working, what the benefits are, and so on. Getting that's really important because and even for the, particularly if you're an internal consulting group that have built this model for another department within the firm, that being able to demonstrate the benefits reflects back on your group about the value you are to the organization and whether or not additional resources or tasks should be assigned to you. That you may need that evaluation just to reinforce or even initially establish the credibility of your group and the quality of the work you do. That evaluation is important for a lot of different players. With some people, they hate evaluation because what if the evaluation is not good? And they view it as a risk and they like to hide things. There are many that hide bad news, or they like to hide good news of other units because it makes them look bad. It's amazing how much of that actually goes on. That your implementation plan also has got risk assessments alongside with it. Nothing works as planned. There are always risks that happen. What if a key member of your team leaves or gets poached by another firm? Do you have a backup plan? That maybe you don't have a plan, but you are aware of it and you'll have to deal with it if and when it happens. But there are risks, definitely. If you look at Target at the beginning, when they first implemented it, that they creeped out their customers because it became quite clear that Target had tools to figure out who was pregnant, and it made those customers very uncomfortable with Target and what do they know and not know. So those are some of the risks, that unintended consequences. So a maintenance plan, that your models rarely are used just once. They're used repetitively. And you need to have some update process. Even if it's what we'll get into next class is descriptive models, not predictive ones, and including things like dashboards. And that you're going to find that if your dashboard is effective, people will respond and they'll ask for other things or they'll ask for changes. And so who's going to be responsible for maintenance? If you had someone outside come in and build it for you, you actually bring them back to go and do the maintenance, or have you trained your own people to do the maintenance yourself? That's quite expensive. I raised before that the new data is going to become available. So how do we incorporate that in? Do we throw out old stuff? How do you evaluate what old data you should keep around? You needed it to get yourself started for the training purposes. But as time goes on, maybe that old stuff should be thrown away, not used anymore. It's biasing things and holding you back. That with that evaluation that I mentioned before, who's doing it? So if performance deteriorates, who's going to fix things? I remember watching one model just collapse because of that they weren't doing any evaluation. Quickly became apparent the model was out of date. And no office wanted to take responsibility for it. It was they had someone come in and build it initially, and they never thought about who was going to do maintenance afterwards. So it's basically got put back in a box and never used again. Waste of hundreds of thousands of dollars. Anyway, as I said, who does that maintenance and the ongoing evaluation? That the operations team is different from the development team. People that develop the model aren't going to be the ones that maintain it. That they do development, they don't do maintenance. It's another group altogether that does that. And if you need maintenance or particularly repairs done, improvements made, trying to get that onto someone's list, thinking of IT projects, it's hard to get attention. That maintenance is usually a low priority within organizations. They like only the new shiny stuff. So let's see. The lessons learned report is very important, usually not done. Often when done, nobody reads it. It's such a waste. It's unfortunate. I'm to blame on doing that myself many times over. So what would you done differently if you were to go do it over again? That right at the beginning, problem definition. Where were the gaps between defining the business problem and the data analytics problem in that transition between the two? Could you have done that better? Did you run off the rails right at the start? What is it the people that are involved, questions that are asked, the time or resources that are allocated to that? Is there different? Do you need a framework for doing it? Can we do it better? Usually we can. Data selection, collection, you'll generally find that the data you've got is not the data you wished you had. You have to work with what you've got. That it's not uncommon to say, we don't have that. We don't collect that information, and so we can't do it. So then start collecting it now. If you think it's really valuable, change your processes so that you start capturing that data. Well, yeah, but we won't be able to use it because we don't have a baseline. In 2 years, in 3 years, you will. So plan ahead that your company is still going to be here, I hope, in another 3 to 5 years. And the data you need to be a successful firm 5 years from now, you've got to start collecting it today. And it may be in going through this project, you've realized what data you should have been collecting, then start collecting it. Again, that's hard to get people to change because they know they're not going to use it right away. So it's not a big priority to change systems to capture it. Modeling, maybe there's a different approach you could have used. It's less of my concern, but maybe from the people that do the data analysis and the like, building the model, they might have some views on that. Biggest problems I've seen are actually at the beginning with the problem definition and the data that they've got. There are issues to do with client relations and communications. Sometimes that's who within the firm is assigned to work with the modeling team or the problem solving team. That do they have a champion that will open doors for them when they hit roadblocks, because there's going to be some players that don't want to cooperate, along with them. This is not unique to data analysis. This is in projects generally, that the project team and the organization, whether the project team is internal or external, there are very frequent communication gaps between the two, and there are issues generally in terms of getting resources or getting roadblocks removed, uncooperative departments that cause delays and the like in getting a project done. And you need, does the project have a champion whose role it is to sort of step in when there's a problem and to open doors? Anyway, at the same time, I focused on all the bad news. A lot of things go really, really well. Can you identify those? And can you identify why they went well so that you can repeat them, continue them? The feedback survey I asked you to complete is my lessons learned report. I'm gathering now information back from you on what worked and what didn't work. I'm doing that evaluation process, and that it's what can I improve, but also what is working well and we should keep doing. Maybe we should do it other classes. That sometimes we don't pay enough attention to that type of thing. So, all right, let's go further. And the summary report. Summary report's the one that you probably think about, writing up all this big report. In courses, you have to write up big reports. Okay, you usually don't have to do these others. So you do projects and courses. All that gets submitted to the instructor is the summary report. Okay, that CRISP has been a process for helping you develop, do the analysis and so on. It's not a framework for writing the report necessarily. So you don't write the report around the CRISP process. Okay? It's a process. It's not an outcome. The report's objective is as I said, to inform and guide action. And so you're going to write it from that perspective. That's your objective in doing it. The CRISP process, you may talk about some parts of your process if it helps informing and guiding the action that takes place. But they're not interested necessarily in how you did your report or how you did your analysis, all of the steps you went through. So it's storytelling, that final report, and that it's writing a really compelling story, not boring the reader to death. You want it to motivate action that takes place. So how do you put it together to get them engaged and to push them to act upon the recommendations you've made? That I don't know who told me this about Aristotle saying a story has three parts: the beginning, the middle, the end. Profound, but it's important actually that the I think when I was told on how do you do a presentation, and I was told there are three parts: beginning, middle, end. And the way it was described was the beginning, you tell me what you're going to tell me what you're going to tell me. So you give me an advance warning of what's coming. But in the middle, you tell me. And the end is you tell me what you told me. So it's repeating the stuff back again. But it gives, you're seeing what the way is ahead at the beginning, at the introduction. At the end, you're summarizing where your travels have taken you. And then you've got this journey in the middle. Hopefully the journey was interesting, but often it isn't. So I like to emphasize the exciting parts of the process, and that the boring parts, I try to find ways of putting in an appendix or something else. Unless it's really important that they know it, I move it to the end or into footnotes and that type of thing. That you want to keep them engaged, and it's hard to keep readers engaged. But it's got to have a very logical flow. That as you go from page 1 to page 2, you're being carried forward from 1 to 2 and 2 to 3 and section to section. It just flows. That runs into one, leads into the other, and you have a good sense of where you've been, where you're going, and where your destination is. There is that logical flow. So when you hit the conclusions, they're not a surprise. They're totally believable because you've been led along the way to that set of conclusions. It's not like some mystery books where you're led along and along and along, and all kinds of different things happen and distract you and take you away. And then the last 20 pages, the mystery is solved. And it's just, oh, it's a surprise ending. And maybe that's exciting in a book. You look forward to that. I don't look forward to that in a report. I don't like surprises at the end. That in the conclusions, the reader should anticipate these from the analysis. And it's not unusual to see reports that go all the way through and then they have recommendations at the end. They've given you 10 recommendations and 4 or 5 of them, yeah, I expected those. You get 2 or 3 in particular that is just, where did that come from? It's on stuff that wasn't in the rest of the report at all. And it was just people that did the work had things they wanted to throw in and may not even have anything to do with the project. They're just pet peeves or something. I don't know. But it really detracts from the report. Then you begin to wonder, did they really, was the analysis just done for show, or did they write the recommendations at the end and then write the report separately? Or was this like a group project that you've probably been involved in that, Jennifer is going to write the introduction. Ashraf says, oh, I'll do the analysis in the middle. And that you've got Robert, whatever that does the conclusions. And they do their work independently, and then you put it together. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. There's no flow. You're trying to identify, in your recommendations, they may take 2 forms. One is actions to take, that you feel very confident your analysis has told them, do this, do this, do this. And then there are others you're going to find, sort of like with a decision tree, where it goes down and you get some groups at the end. Yes, these ones are all the same. They're People like this renew insurance, and people like that, they never renew their insurance. And then there's a group in the middle that I just don't know what these people are going to do. Study them more. We don't have enough data about this group. That are there areas that warrant further investigation? You just didn't have the time or resources, or more often, you think there's something there, but you never had the data for it. You had gaps in the data. There are variables that maybe should have been collected, data that should have been collected but hadn't been. And so going forward, start collecting this data so that you can drill into that particular question in more depth. That in guiding them at the end, and like this is leading to an implementation plan, you may be talking about how it should be done. If you're the outside consultant, even if you're inside, you don't know everything about how the organization functions, who does what the games are, what's the official organizational structure and the unofficial organizational structure, who has power and who doesn't. So you may not know all that stuff, and you shouldn't expect it to be knowing it. That so if you can identify, a group that should be taking ownership of something that would make sense in your minds at least, then say so. You probably can't drill down deeper than that. So in writing the report, okay, you've been taught probably a style of writing reports, or you will be taught in various courses that are how you write academic reports. A lot of people like using the APA style guide, the American Psychological Association, how you write footnotes and how you do paraphrasing and how you do headings. And there are a whole bunch of little formatting bits that you need for an academic paper. Well, you're not writing for academics. You're not publishing this in journals. You're writing it for someone to use. Very often it's to managers, one or more. And they're generally, if they're good, they're busy. And some of them will read in detail. Watch out for that. Beware. Don't assume that none of them read. Some of them do. And they read very carefully and they can absorb stuff really well. But a lot of them are just too busy. And so they scan things. They read like you probably do. Do you read a textbook? Do you read it page to page? An economics text. Did you read your micro and macroeconomics text beginning to end? I bet you scanned it. You just sort of, your eyes skim over things and then periodically stop and read stuff. That's the way managers read a lot of things. That they look for things that might be interesting to them, that resonate with them, that warrant their attention. And when they're doing that, you have to think of the behavior they have. And I'm not an expert in this. I'm just talking about the way I read, and many others seem to say they read. Think about how you read when you're reading stuff, especially when you're reading online. It's changed the way we read. That things like headings, boldface type, underlining, color, text boxes, those sorts of things can either be a distraction that they attract your eye, but they may take you away from the story that you're trying to read. Others help you focus on the story. They help you identify, like getting ready for an exam and you ask the prof, what's important? What should I really study? You say, everything. That doesn't help you. There are some things that are more important than others. So how do you identify what those should be? Now, among the things that grab your attention, and particularly that fit with this course, because it's all about data, are tables and graphs, pictures. Pictures capture the eye, that they are a break from all that text. And they can be very, very powerful tools, but they've got to be done well. That things like headings, labels, all of that sort of thing have to be really clear and simple. To some extent, I've tried to draw your attention to a few of those when making charts. I've gotten after you to label the axes and give a title that's informative, that tells you what the picture is. That there's a lot of attention to detail that needs to be done to do this really, really well. That the data has got to be really clean, simple, that type of thing. Uh, that I hate the large number of digits. I don't like a lot of decimals. Most numbers, the first digit and maybe the first two digits are the only things that are really important. That do you need to know that the cost of this car is new car that you're looking at is $21,315.27. No, it's going to cost you over $30,000 or about $31,000. First couple of digits are enough to tell you what's really important. The rest of it gets in the way. So again, looking at numbers, rounding them or truncating them, reporting it only in thousands of dollars instead of getting down to the other things, not showing decimals, that they and only the data they need to look at, because it's just too much. It gets overwhelming. That the charts as well, really, that the labeling of chart elements and identifying good titles is really important. And I'll try to show you some examples. We'll get to examples in a minute. That generally I like looking at charts rather than tables. And charts are simple. They're more emotional. That you feel a chart, whereas you have to read a table. It's different in the way it comes across to you. That John Tukey, he's the guy behind Box and Whisker charts and a whole bunch of other really simple exploratory data analysis tools. He was also a very smart mathematician. He's not. The simplicity is deceiving when you look at the work he did. Anyway, he said the greatest value of a picture is when it forces us to notice what we never expected to see, brings out things that we wouldn't spot otherwise, and particularly ones that we didn't expect to see. So there's a bunch of standard charts in Excel. There are a bunch of others, waterfall charts, heat maps, starburst charts. Don't go there. That you may have seen Box and Whisker charts for the first time in the course. These other charts as well are more complicated charts, the ones you're less familiar with. And so with more of these fancier charts, you have to explain them to your audience, and hopefully they interpret them correctly. That I would recommend you steer away from them unless you've got a very sophisticated audience that knows how to read them well. Stick to really simple charts. But even among these simple ones, there are different ways they can be done, and that they can be done well or done poorly. Let's run through some. So I'll just show you initially a few charts. This is from back in my time and trying to advise the university about students and looking at the demographics of business students, for example. This is data from the Maritime Provinces Higher Education Commission. It's an organization that collects data from the universities in New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, and Nova Scotia. And so I can use it if I want to look at market data in terms of business students. Where are they coming from? That this was sort of a helpful chart. And this would be for the region as a whole. And you could see that Nova Scotia enrollments been declining over time. They're flattening out now. International been going up, though we did have some turbulence along the way. And now into the pandemic period, there was more turbulence. I'll get more data later. Every year it gets updated. But you'll see outside of the region, we don't get that many. So these are ones that are studying business in Nova Scotia, that we get a lot more from Ontario than we do from our neighbors in New Brunswick or Prince Edward Island. And from Western Canada, not much at all. That gives you a sense of, okay, how do you focus your energy on these different markets and how have they changed over time? That This is the same data, but I've now stacked those lines one on top of each other. So this is individual markets and how many students. So the Nova Scotia students went from 3,500 down to probably about 2,800 over this 20-year period almost. A couple of things you may want to note. I've arranged the lines here with their labels in sequence. So the top line I've called Nova Scotia since it was on top most of the time. International was second, and Central Canada, Atlantic Canada, and the West. So I've not organized them in their location, but in terms of their market share, so that it makes it easier for me to, my eye is first drawn to the big ones at the top, so I put the labels up here at the same time. That my title just says changing demographics, because that's the main thing that I'm seeing here, is things have been changing a fair bit. That the typo growth, growth in business enrollments in Nova Scotia all depends upon international. How do I get that? So again, I've done my chart and I've stacked them. So here is the Nova Scotia ones going from 3,500 down to about 2,800. Okay. And I've put on top of that, I've layered on top the international. So it was relatively small at the start and it's much, much bigger now. And then I did the Ontario, Central Canada, and the Atlantic Canada, and then Western Canada. So this shows me that 20 years ago, we had under 6,000 students studying business, and now we've got over 8,000. So we've seen an increase of more than a third in business school enrollment over the 20-year period. But it didn't come from Nova Scotia. That growth came almost exclusively from international students. That's why I put it in the title. Okay. This is what's called a stacked line chart. And it's trickier to read. For the Nova Scotia students, I can see how it's changed. But the others, you know, international, the change is so big that you can see that sort of bit here. But trying to evaluate how did Atlantic enrollment change over time? And is it smaller or bigger than it was before? It's hard to see because it keeps waving, go up and down and up and down. So it makes it hard to look at annual changes in subgroups, whereas the regular line chart I just had showed me quite easily, oh, Atlantic was flat, but notice that the West was increasing slightly and Central Canada was also increasing somewhat, though it's been flat for the last decade or so. That's hard to see here, that it stayed flat from about here to here for Ontario, but it was growing for the first decade. It was flat for the second. That's hard to see in a stacked line chart. But this one gives me an idea of what's the total impact of all these changes together. So what's your objective? Depends. So you got to think of what your objective is of the chart. What's the story you're trying to tell? Then you have to figure out what's the right chart to do it. So here's a bunch of made up ones about a company that has 4 major product lines and it sells in 4 major markets. Now, start out by looking just at the Netherlands and looking at the 4 products that I've got. How do they compare in terms of total sales? So I'm looking at a breakdown. What percentage fits into each? These are really popular, in part because they're nice, colorful. They make a very nice picture. But when looking at it, does it look like B and D are almost exactly the same size? Does it look like B and D are about 3 times as big as C? Or that A is twice as big as C? It's tricky. You can get a sense of who's bigger than whom, but relatively speaking, it's hard to judge because we're not good at comparing areas. Now, when these first started rolling out, and this, you saw an awful lot of these starting in the late 1980s as software, just before Excel. There was a program called Lotus 123, did charting and a spreadsheet, and people loved these charts. And so they started adding enhancements on how you could do fancier charts. One of them being 3D charts, 3 dimensions. There's only there's actually, well, we're comparing product and market share. That's the only thing we're showing. So that's sort of 2 dimensions. Which product? Size of share. What's the third dimension? No, it's just taking this and adding some depth in it. And then to show the depth, we tilt it backwards. So you notice that I've stretched it left to right, and it's not as far front to back. So some of the slices get stretched more than others. That the B in particular looks huge. And then it's in the front. So you get the perception of the depth there. And it makes B look even bigger, and it makes C look much, much bigger. C looks almost as big as A because of this extra thickness bit here. It twists everything around. It's a stupid chart. Never. This is what we'd call chart junk. We were calling it that 30 plus years ago. It's still chart junk today. It's still being used. Don't do it though. Excel will do this for you. These are generated in Excel. But they aren't a good idea. So what else can we do with these pie charts? Well, I said this company sold its product in 4 markets. So let me just hide me altogether. Suppose I wanted to compare the Netherlands to Austria to Belgium to Norway. Okay. Product A is really busy, seems to be in Netherlands. Oh, more so in Austria, that not very big in Belgium. Belgium really likes D. Everybody likes D. But no, look at these guys. They're different. Everyone's different. How do I compare these? What is it I'm trying to tell? Why would I even build these charts? Why not just give them a simple table to describe this stuff? What exactly am I trying to show here? Okay. Why don't I just have a simple table, and I'll have Netherlands, Belgium, Austria, Norway, and products A, B, C, D, and I'll have percentage of row total or column total, however way I've organized it. I was actively involved in building the Sobe building and renovating the Loyola building 25 plus years ago. I might show you some pictures next class. The project manager for that was also a former architect. And the first thing we had to do was tell the architects what is the building supposed to do. So what were our objectives in doing the building and renovation? And we weren't to draw pictures. We were to go and list how we are going to use the building, what the purposes were, what was the function of the building, why have it in the first place. And we worked for months on that and eventually built a report describing, well, we need a certain number of classrooms of a certain size, and these are the attributes of the classroom, and how we planned on using it, the type of instruction that went on in the classroom, a whole bunch of those types of things. And then the architect had to come up with an appropriate design that met those objectives of the way we would want to teach. But in planning this, we went and visited many different institutions and looked at facilities they had, and we saw a lot of really pretty classrooms and a lot of pretty buildings. But I took lots of pictures of them. But we were reminded again, you're not building a pretty building. It would be nice if it is, but the thing is, you want a building that functions properly. Form follows function. With charts, we have the same problem. There are a lot of really attractive, pretty charts, but you've got to think about what's the purpose of the chart? What's your objective? Get that really clear in your head. Then you go and look at what types of charts are good for that type of purpose. Okay? And I found with pie charts, there are very few instances where I would use a pie chart. I'll show you next class one where that is the case. I think it was a nice pie chart, but most of the time I don't use them. The column charts, we've seen a lot of these in the course. I've used them probably more than any other type of chart. And so here I've got, this is what we called a clustered column chart. So this was like with a pivot table, and I've got rows and columns. My rows were the different countries, and the columns were the different products I had. And so here's the generic one. I've got them organized in some sequence of the different countries, and I got products A through D. What's it trying to tell me? Why did I build the chart? Looking at it, Norway seems to be a bigger market than the Netherlands is. Okay. But beyond that, I'm not quite sure. That at the very least, I think I do have it organized with the smallest market, Netherlands, and the largest one, Norway. I've got them sequenced that way. So if I'm sequencing the countries, why not also sequence the products? Probably use the same sequence for each country so it doesn't get confusing, so I can color code them appropriately. So blue is product C all the way across. But why do I organize my products alphabetically? Why not have my, if I'm sorting my countries smallest to largest, let's sort the products overall smallest to largest. So it may not be the smallest or largest in a given country, but across all 4 markets, it's the smallest or it's the largest. And so this might be more informative to me in terms of my biggest seller is product B, and it seems to be particularly so in Belgium and Norway. Okay? It's also really important in the Netherlands, but its market share is much less than other guys. It gives me a little bit, but I'm again, what's the sort? My title, I don't know why I built the chart, so I just call it product sales by country. It's, I don't know what the objective is here. I need to figure that out. Maybe I'd like to do it like a stacked line chart to emphasize how much bigger Norway is as a market than the Netherlands, and then within that market, how important each product is. So I've taken that same thing and my least, I've sorted it again. A, B, C, D may not be the best way. So the lowest selling product to the highest selling product, or no, they're just alphabetical order. I'd probably want to go and put B at the beginning, my biggest selling one, as the base. And then the last one on top would be my slowest selling one. Sort of like the way I did my stacked line chart with Nova Scotia historically was our biggest market, and then international, then Ontario, and so on. That in doing this, though, you may not get a sense as well as how relatively important some products are to others within a market. So, excuse me. So you may want to do it as a stacked column chart, but show percentage. And this is sort of like a pie chart, but instead of a pie for the Netherlands, I've just made a column for the Netherlands. This sometimes is better than a pie chart. Again, how you sequence the products may be important here. Okay? That I've just done it alphabetically. But we are better at measuring things on a single dimension, like height, and measuring them in 2 dimensions, like area. So how big a slice of a pie is, or just how big this is. So very quickly, I can see B is a super important product right across all 4. But it's less important in Austria than it is in the other 3 markets there. That orange one also looks to be quite important. That's product D. It's especially important in Belgium, but much less so maybe in Norway. That product C, it's sort of important, but probably comes in third or fourth place in every country. And the blue one, it's quite variable from market to market. But it's easy to see that very, very quickly with a stacked column chart. What am I trying to show, though? I can also do that as a clustered column chart to show percentages. Again, how do you want to sequence the things? I'm not sure what that chart tells me at all. I'm back to being confused. I don't know what the story is that's here. So deciding, if you don't know the purpose of the chart, don't put it in. But this is an example of just, it would be clear that the author didn't know what they were trying to do, regardless of which of these charts was being used. This was some data, I can't remember where I got it from, on an appliance manufacturer, and looking at 4 years of data and sales of different products. Now I could do it as a clustered column chart, and this one I organized it for their, slowest selling product at the beginning and their biggest selling one at the end. Okay, so it had this panoramic view across there. It's not structured correctly. I thought I had it correct by having 2017 at the top and 2014 at the bottom, but you'll notice that the timeline is backwards. 2017 is first, 2014 is last. I should rearrange my data so that it starts with the first column being 2014 and the last one being 2017. We do see here over time, not much change has taken place across the 4 years for any of the products. Do I need to go and show year now, or can I just aggregate it and look at the last 4 years, or on average over 4 years, and look at relative importance of different products? That might be a more appropriate way. Reading it, I have trouble. I've labeled things, and these are all appliances. I probably didn't need to put APP colon in there. I could have removed that and simplified this a bit, but still, these are dryers, gas, and a washer, top load. I don't know. Hard to read. It's easier to read if you make it into a bar chart. And so generally when the labels on that horizontal axis are long, that you can't fit them in horizontally, turn it into a bar chart. And so this one works actually quite well as a bar chart. And this one, the sequence works well as well. I've got 2014 first and 2017 last. Again, I see very little change over the 4 years. It's relatively easy to read. I've put the most important thing at the top of my list. That I don't know the research anymore on websites, but if I can remember correctly, your eye generally gets drawn to the top right. So the most important thing you put in the top right of a screen, the least important in the bottom left of the screen. And so I tend to make things I want your attention drawn to be the last, at the end of my chart, if I'm going left to right, or if it's in this sort top to bottom, I'll put it first in the categories as I go down. But you may want to think about those things in terms of how the eye is drawn. This we've seen before. This was our histograms we did of this was income by credit risk group. But no, it wasn't income. It was the credit card balance that they had labeled incorrectly. That this just was a count of credit card holders. My groups were of different size. And so this is deceptive in terms of trying to compare. I think got fewer people in the low risk group and probably lots in the medium risk group. And then I've got some in the high risk group. I haven't organized this high, medium, low, in part because the high are on the left. Oh, they just seem to be arbitrary. It's alphabetical. I should have done it differently. I should have tried to structure it so that these things made sense. reading it across. So I could change it like we did. We changed it from frequency to percentages so that they're all on the same scale. And it makes it easier to look at the blue group versus the gray group versus the orange group. And you see as we move to the right, it also sort of, the chart settles down to some extent. It isn't so all and that type of thing. That the low group, notice how spread out they are, whereas the blue group was much more compact, stretched, pushed together. The generally, though, I don't recommend, like I did in class, I didn't recommend that we look at histograms, that type of column chart, when I'm comparing a large number of groups on a numeric variable. That it's much better if I'm looking at something like a box and whisker chart, if my audience knows how to use a box and whisker chart. And this one shows me that the credit card balance is lowest for the high risk customers, balance is highest for the low risk ones, but there's a lot more variability among this low risk group than there is in the high risk group. And we've also got some outliers. That this little simplistic stick man drawing box and whisker chart is often much better for trying to compare multiple groups. But you might have to explain to your audience what this thing is. They may be familiar with a high-low chart, and this is similar to a high-low chart. That's, again, something you can get with Excel that might be like showing stock prices over time and what was the daily high, what was the daily low, what was the median price for that stock. That it's along those sorts of lines that, again, your audience may be able to grasp that type of thing. Scatter charts, that you may take them for granted. This was one a student gave me a couple years ago, that we were looking, I was asking them to look at high school average and first year grade point average, and what's the relationship between the two. And that this is the point I was trying to emphasize about clear labeling and attention to detail. There were obvious outliers. These were grade point averages. One of them was a 15. Probably it should have been a 1.5, and there was no error checking taking place. But either fix that and make it a 1.5, or throw it out of the data set. It's an outlier. Here I've got 3 that reported a a high school average of 0. Oh, come on. We wouldn't admit someone with a high school average of 0. Again, these are outliers. These don't belong. You may notice that my axes are incorrect. That I wanted to look at, does high school average predict your grade point average? That on the horizontal axis, student had grade point average, on the vertical axis, high school average. So we could have cleaned this up. Here it is cleaned up. So I've gotten rid of the outliers. Okay. Now I've got a grade point average of 0. Yes, for a student that had an 80 coming in. Unfortunately, those things happen. And there's probably a good story behind that one. So here were the grade data. I've got a couple students that are below the minimum for admission. So they were probably admitted on some special conditions. That I'm going from 60, I'm ending at 100. That GPA, I know it goes up to 4.3. I put the scale up to 4.5 and put it on the right axis. I've labeled it accordingly. Here's my scatter chart. You might notice that most students didn't report their average exactly. They guesstimated 70, 75, 80, 85, 90. I can't believe that we got these high concentrations right on those values. And I put a line through it to draw attention to the fact that it is trending upwards. And I gave it a title. High school is not a strong predictor of university success. That's what the picture is telling me. So putting all of those in, now the picture is telling me a story. Okay, all the elements are coming together. And that's what you're going to be focusing on, is storytelling. That scatter charts we only looked at it in a simple fashion. I think I did show you this one here to do with credit rating and credit card balance. I can show two things at once. This is done in Excel. There's a process for doing it. That for those that were students and those that were not students. So I'm not only showing you that as credit rating goes up, that the credit card balance does, but the main story in this one is that students borrow more even after adjusting for credit rating. So that's the story that's here. I didn't need the line here. That would be a distraction, that you can see the trend. What I wanted to show is the orange was above the blue for most of the students. Okay. Let's try one more. Now, this is where it gets busy. Now, this is done not in Excel. It's using a software tool called Tableau. Tableau is used for building dashboards, and that the it was showing a whole bunch of things to do with the percentage of students or applicants that were admitted to an institution, how important tuition fees are of total in terms of total income. So like St. Mary's, it's probably about 65, 70% of our total income comes from tuition fees. So we're up here, but there's some where tuition fees really don't matter. MIT, something like that. But they were also showing other things. These are all different institutions, and they labeled the institutions on the dots here as well. It gets very busy. That they looked at how important first-year students are to their overall tuition, or to their in terms of their income and that type of thing. And are they not very important? That would be a dark brown. That mainly it's graduate students or something. Or is it very, very important? That would be the dark blue. That St. Mary's, a lot of that of our revenue comes from tuition. That they had another one here in the size of the dots is what they call draw rate. And that had to do with of the students that you're offering admission to, what percentage of them actually show up? Okay? And if most of them take your offer for admission, then that's really, really good. So a place like MIT, admission rate is like 4%, but almost everybody that gets offered admission shows up. Whereas you get some of these other ones up here that New York School of Interior Design, that no, it's they may offer, they admit lots of students, 24% of applicants, but most of those students don't actually take up their offer of admission. So it varies quite widely. But they're trying to show a whole bunch of different variables at the same time. So there are 4 different things here. You can also change the shape from a dot to a star or a square or other things. You could possibly show, is this a private institution or a public institution by different types of dots, categorical variable. You can do all kinds of stuff, but it's confusing. It's hard to read. They can be really powerful communication tools, but as I said, that as fascinating as they are, it's not, beautiful buildings are not necessarily successful buildings. That what you want is to make sure it meets the function. And then when you have choices, making it as attractive as possible is a good idea. People like to look at it. It'll get their attention and that type of thing. But it has to achieve some purpose. Okay? That some people talk of it in terms of the ink to information ratio. Convey as much information as you can with as little ink as you can. Don't add unnecessary detail. It's really distracting to the eye. Okay? That label those axes, give an informative title, sequence things. So if you're showing multiple groups, do it in a meaningful way, smallest to largest, largest to smallest. I'll show you one next class that does things east to west. That if you're trying to show 3 variables at once, probably getting too complicated. That last one we did was showing 4 variables at once. That was definitely, actually 5, because it even gave you the name of the institution. Too much information. It gets overwhelming. So we're going to end it here. Next time, I'm going to try to put some of these together, show you elements of several stories. So several reports that what I liked about the reports, what I didn't like about the reports. A couple of charts that are focused on storytelling. So they may be custom designed to tell a particular story. And I'll show you some dashboards, which are like descriptive models, but that you've got to think of, okay, you're showing me a description of this. Why is it? What's the purpose? How would I be using this? Who's the audience I'm speaking to? And that some dashboards can be very, very well designed. A lot of them are very amateurish, and many are too cluttered. It isn't clear what purposes of this. People use them once and then never use them again. Anyway, we're all done. So let's end here.